According to L. Binding, scientists have warned that COVID-19 epidemic has reached a critical stage with the surge of daily infections and that existing measures to control the virus aren't working. Amidst the uncertainty of the virus, and with a worldwide reaction of fear, anger, paranoia and repentance, naturally artists were inspired to present images and sounds we can only hear and see in our nightmares. One of the most effective ways of achieving this goal, of course, is filmmaking. Film, especially contemporary cinema, has an overwhelming effect on everyday people. The masses witness breathtaking scenarios, but there are few depictions of the horror, plague and infections. This has been a fantastic hook for individuals to exaggerate and explore prior and existing pandemics in a way which heightens the audience member's viewing experience, but also asks the question, how would you and your loved ones cope with a similar situation? Why are we interested in films? P. Kemp states that motion pictures both created and fed an appetite for spectacle, offering the possibility of recreating the past, reimagining the present and visualizing the future. The technology for making movies was invented in 1895, but the first films were often just a few seconds long and depicted simple everyday events or tricks effects. Films with a recognisable narrative arrived in the 20th century. No other place was as prolific in the 20th century as Hollywood. By the end of the 1920s, society had almost collapsed. For the next 6 decades, communism, fascism and National Socialism had created mass paranoia. American and European filmmakers had portrayed their enemies as aliens from another planet, with examples such as Metropolis and Rocket Ship XM. But in 1957, Swedish film director Ingmar Bergman released The Seventh Seal. In this surrealistic depiction of 14th century Sweden during the Black Death Plague, it tells the story of a medieval knight playing a game of chess with the embodiment of death. If the knight loses, then the embodiment of death will take his soul.
Du spelar ju schack, inte sant?
Hur vet du det?
Ja. Jag har sett det på målningar och hört i visorna.
Ja, jag är verkligen en ganska skicklig schackspelare.
Du kan ändå inte vara skickligare än jag.
From historical references, we understand how horrible it was to have lived through a pandemic which killed almost a third of Europe's population, and this is prevalent in the themes and imagery used. P. Kemp states that Bergman's own eschatological musings were lent fresh urgency by what was going on in the world at the time. It was the height of the Cold War, when many feared the world might face nuclear annihilation. Despite some inaccuracies, the film beautifully demonstrates the true value of human life, even if it comes from the mouth of death. As we transitioned into the 21st century, filmmakers continued to capitalise on the film fever of pandemics. In 2002, British film director Danny Boyle released 28 Days Later. The story takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, primarily London, after unbeknownst political activists release chimpanzees infected with a highly contagious virus. Our protagonist awakens from a coma in a virtually abandoned city, and as we look on empty streets and hear nothing but silence, accompanied with haunting score, we are reminded that this character represents our strengths and weaknesses. The virus is presented to us as having a mind-altering, violent, animal-like effect, while it also pays compliments to George A. Romero's 1968 classic, Night of the Living Dead. C. Eggleston states that what's so amazing about film is the way it so expertly balances scenes of white-knuckled, hell-for-leather horror with moments of intimate beauty. The film's presentation generally stays sincere to reality, despite the flesh-eating creatures that sprint after our characters. If we can learn anything from this film, we should not meddle with things we don't really understand, only to avoid permanent damages. In relation to humanitarian struggle and aspirations, we are then presented in 2007 with Francis Lawrence's horror thriller film, I Am Legend. In this post-apocalyptic New York setting, Dr. Robert Neville is the only human survivor after the failure of an experimental cancer cure. By day, Dr. Neville attends to his scientific research, communicates verbally with mannequins scattered across the city as though nothing happened, and looks after his pet dog. However, by night, what remains of human beings have evolved into vampiric mutants only able to have free roam when the sun sets. A. Lane states that, a rarity among dystopias, this film has the goal to suggest, however briefly, that the apocalypse might be fun. As the story unfolds, we understand that Dr. Neville attempts to reverse the effects of the virus by using his own immune blood, although in an accident we are presented with the tragedy that his faithful dog is bitten by one of the creatures. Dr. Neville is now completely alone. The theme of abandonment is crucial to these types of films, as we get to see what normal people would do in nightmarish situations. A crucial emotional moment is in the middle of the film, where Dr. Neville walks into a DVD rental shop where he talks to a mannequin before starting to cry, solely asking,
"Please say hello to me."
Through the lockdown, we have all felt like Dr. Neville at some point, and his adaptation captures the essence of human kindness, and although he's the last human alive, he firmly clings on to his humanity and will do everything within his ability to reverse the virus. Many of these depictions of people surviving through a pandemic show us exactly what to do, acting precise, acting carefully, and trying their best not to infect others. However, in this next scenario, we are presented with the complete opposite of what to do. In It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, a TV show about 5 underachieving, narcissistic egomaniacs that own a bar in South Philadelphia, as they interact with regular people and objectively ruin their lives, intentional or unintentionally.
I'll tell you what, man. Why don't you go ahead and have this present anyway?
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you deserve it.
Well, thanks, dude. That's rad. Alright, well, keep it real, man.
Okay.
Alright.
In 2013, the 7th episode of the 9th series, entitled The Gang Gets Quarantined, our protagonists self-isolate for a singing competition once they discover that a severe flu break sweeps Philadelphia. Keeping within the nihilistic tone of the series, some of our protagonists ignore the self-isolation rules and thus are isolated on their own. Meanwhile, one of our protagonists develops cabin fever and begins to question everything around him and routinely sanitizes surfaces as well as shaving his head.
Why is there hand sanitizer all over the floor? What's in here? Oh!
Frank?
Oh my God.
What the hell did you do to yourself?
I just wanna be pure.
Jay Tisdale states that Frank, Danny DeVito, alerts the gang that his sweet old neighbour has died from the flu. He thinks they should quarantine to avoid the germs haunting Philadelphia. The gang's immediate response is that they'll be fine because they're young, but Frank will probably die because he's old and feeble. Eventually, Dennis, Glenn Howerton, agrees that they need to quarantine, but only to protect their voices. The gang wants to compete in a boys to men singing competition, so they all agree to self-isolate. Of course, madness ensues when they're trapped together. This episode was extremely prophetic, both in the ways of presenting the selfishness of the characters as well as the paranoia, the scenario that we find ourselves in currently. The benefit of fiction, of course, is the fact that these actions are exaggerated for comedic purposes and have generally zero to little effect on the real world. Well, for the most part. There can be no doubt that we are fascinated by the uncomfortable aspects of nature and fiction, especially when they are projected onto a large silver screen. To explore how human beings cope with the scenarios like this on and off screen is exciting. Whether it's just a cough, a reaction to an experimental vaccine, or a gang of flesh-eating creatures, we see time and time again that humanity acts both out of fear and love. It is to be expected when people are faced with life or death situations, we let our vanity and ego dictate what happens, and we see what happens to selfish people in fictional accounts. Or we come together as a species outside of personal identity labels and we do our duty to protect children, elderly people and people with prior medical conditions. And those are my thoughts for how film and TV portray pandemics and plagues. I hope you've enjoyed the video, I hope you continue to enjoy the content, and I hope you keep your eyes and ears peeled for the next succession of videos, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and just hope you enjoy the rest of the year, and you keep safe and take care. Cheers.